Impala comrades on allegations and counter allegations, but we hope that the investigative journalism pillar will not be weakened in any way during this time, as it forms part of our informed discourse in tackling the issues affecting the country. Journalism is provided for under Section 61 of the Constitution, and the government should not be seen to be taking part towards the weakening of our Constitution, but should be proactive in ensuring that perpetrators of attacks of journalists do not go unpunished, so that we send a deterrent measure, a deterrent message to those that will be planning to do the same. So it is not normal to have up to 40 journalists and media workers being attacked in a country that is outside strife, that is outside war. It must be a given that journalists are allowed to access public bodies, they are allowed to access information at any given time, and they do so without fear that post journalistic interventions there will be repercussions or consequences. The second issue, this is also equally tied to regional dimensions. The attacks of journalists are not localized in Zimbabwe alone. In Mozambique, there is a journalist who has been missing since 7 April, abducted by the army. His name is Mbrakwa Brian. He was abducted on the 7th of April, and since then, the Mozambican authorities have not accounted for him. As early as August, we had 2 journalists again being assaulted in Mozambique. One for the press wire, that is Canal to Mozambique, and the other one for DW, based in the same country. In Zambia, it was actually the government shutting down Prime TV for refusing to air adverts of the government without them settling in terms of obligations. He said, Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, the monarch gone wrong, amok. 2 journalists simply asked questions. Is the king safe during this COVID pandemic? And they had to run for dear life to cross the border to South Africa because they were being harassed. Same happens in Zimbabwe, the cases which I have highlighted in detail. So we need to link the dots. It's no longer a Zimbabwean story, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, the characteristics of the Zimbabwean attacks in terms of journalism are equally reflected in the region. So we want to reflect a fair picture in terms of how these regional developments are impacting on us as an industry in the country. Where in other jurisdictions in previous years, people were quick to say SADC intervened, journalists are under siege. It is now difficult because they are also under siege elsewhere within those certain countries. So it is difficult to call for mediation and deterrent measures from the very same comrades who are behaving with impunity in terms of attacking journalists. So let's link the dots. Let's present a full story in terms of what is happening in Zimbabwe and how it relates to our neighboring countries. The second issue I want to discuss is the complexity of media law reform process in Zimbabwe, which is fragmented and leaning towards ticking the box. Fragmented in that the law reform follows, the laws come first before the policy is defined. In normal societies, the policy is established, which sets the tone and the framework within which new laws will emerge. In our case, we start with the laws and think backwards, that, oh, now we have the laws, which policies are they promoting? So this is the same situation we face with the 2 laws that are under review. Firstly, IPA, Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and the Broadcasting Services Act, which are government-led. They were cherry-picked by government as the 2 laws that need reform. Of these 2 laws, IPA has been repealed as of July 2020 by the Freedom of Information Act. but there are gaps because the Freedom of Information Act deals with access to information component of the law. While IPA was an omnibus law which dealt with 3 pillars of regulation: access, media regulation, and privacy, the Freedom of Information Act has repealed a single component of those 3. So the law is now seated on one leg and the other 2 legs are still missing. Where in the Freedom of Information Act is a better piece of information compared to its predecessor, we believe that it still has gaps that must be attended to. And as an industry, we have got an obligation to fully articulate and unpack this law so that the citizens can be better informed. The first point of its weakness is that it prefers that appeals are handled with the Zimbabwe Media Commission. But access to information is a broader right than the media. For example, in this COVID pandemic, if a citizen is aggrieved around access to information related to the COVID pandemic, the Zimbabwe Media Commission will be clueless on how to handle it. So you need a broader body that understands substantive rights as standalone rights, which have got mandate to bring expertise to help it in terms of enabling the right to access to information. In our initial proposal, we had proposed that it goes under the appeal of the Human Rights Commission. But the ministry was not happy with that and it ended up railroading it towards the Zimbabwe Media Commission. But it is progressive in many ways, in that it is now going to create offices of the information officer. Where you want information in a public body, you have to go to an information officer of that public body. But we need to assess whether the government is in compliance with this development. The second piece of legislation, the Zimbabwe Media Commission, which creates co-regulation, is before Parliament. And we had running battles with the government because the way they presumed co-regulation was going to be established was not in sync with the industry. And we have since managed to push towards the separation, further separation of the Zimbabwe Media Commission Bill into the Zimbabwe Media Commission and the Media Practitioners Bill. Where in the Zimbabwe Media Commission Bill will give operationalization, my apologies, Zuma, operationalization of the Zimbabwe Media Commission through setting the parameters in which the Constitutional Commission will intervene in terms of media development, access to information, and the right to privacy. And the Zimbabwe Media Practitioners Bill taking the responsibility of defining how the journalists will be regulating themselves. These 2 creatures will then enforce a single code of conduct. We hope that this logical understanding will emerge. You know, with dealing with the government, logic is not given. You can push as much as you want, but what emerges, it can even shock the government itself, what it has done. So we hope that logic in the end will prevail. The third component is the right to privacy component. Initially, the Ministry of Information wanted to come with its own piece of personal privacy protection bill. But I think they were knocked off with the Ministry of ICTs. They moved fast and lumped it to the cyber security and data protection bill. So the data protection component will now regulate the privacy element of our media law, of the enjoyment of the right to privacy. So as I said, the only leg that is legally standing is the Freedom of Information Act. The other 2 legs, it's said that the other ones are in Parliament at different stages, but the right to information is now apparent in the law. Now we go into the problematic regulation of broadcasting. This is a problematic area, isn't it? If I continue without caution in attending to this area, I end up in the front page comment of newspaper. You remember how it goes. But that as it might be. Broadcasting, Zimbabwe is a broadcasting nightmare. Broadly. Our country is a radio country, just like South Africa. Most of the consumption behavior of our nation is hinged on radio. That's the biggest component of communication that the country communicates with. Television has been a monopoly for quite some time, with ZBC being the one and only choice since independence. Not even since independence. Prior to independence, it was also equally protected. So in terms of the media law reform process, what we got concerned with is that the government withheld the Broadcasting Services Amendment Bill. Initially, it had presented it to the stakeholders for consultations in December 2018. And some of the things that we quickly observed in that amendment bill were shocking, and we pushed them back, and then they decided to withhold the bill. Firstly, they sought to outlaw donations for the establishment of community radios. What it means is that, for example, the request or the invitation for community radios to apply under the statutory instrument imposes up to $2,000 in statutory obligations on community radios for them to start to complete the process of registration. Before you go to operational issues, before you go to placement issues, before you go to content generation issues, if you're a community radio station that wants to be registered, you must pay to the government up to $2,000. So you take a community like Cholocho or maybe Shamva or Shuruku or something like that. Do you foresee a situation whereby a community will forego procurement of maize seed if they get $2,000 and sink it into broadcasting? Or they elect to forego food relief and sink it into broadcasting? So with such a law, it exposes government intention that it doesn't want to open the industry to communities to broadcast. Why, if you want them to broadcast, you allow for donations to be the center of establishment of community radio stations. Why? Because they can't, it's capital intensive. You can't start a community radio at $2,000 on statutory obligations alone. And think that post sinking 2,000, which is not guaranteed that you retain the license. These are non-refundable costs that they will still proceed to come up with community radio stations. When we were consulting with the government, when they came up with this bill, the PEMSEC had highlighted that they had already mobilized funds for community radio stations, and that they had a budget then of $100,000 then in 2018. And he said that of that 100,000, each community will be having 10,000 apportioned to it. Then when we made a lot of noise that it's now the government that intends to license itself as community radios, then they pulled back and said that they were just consulting our communities. But coincidentally, those areas where they went to identify chiefs and related stakeholders who are supposed to form the crux of their community radio stations are the same destinations or jurisdictions that have been invited to apply for community radio stations. It's quite a bizarre that you have a call for applications for community radio stations and it has names of geography there. You say, Shampa, please apply. What about if I want to apply as a community of interest in Harare? Why are you not saying Harare please apply? Which mode did you use to land at Sham? And ironically, these are the areas that the ministry has a footprint in terms of consulting that they are critical towards the application. The second issue that is problematic is they kept foreign direct investment to 20 to 25% in terms of broadcasting. This is another nightmare. Broadcasting is capital intensive, as I've said. It requires a lot of rights to buy content, a lot of capital intensive procurement. And for you to minimize foreign direct investment to 20 to 25%, it shows that you are trying to protect the monopoly of ruling elite class in terms of broadcasting domination and domain in Zimbabwe. So our thinking is that if you want to stimulate growth, open it up, attract cheap capital from foreign direct investment, and then allow it to evolve, to develop, so that it also creates a downstream industry of content generation. Look what South Africa does. The bulk of the content which is being consumed, the soapies, the music, generated within the country, because there's a downstream industry that relies on broadcasting. In our situation, it's locked. 20 to 25%. Do you foresee a situation whereby the current economy, you can come up with up to 80% injection into broadcasting, where you only start enjoying a profit maybe 10 years from now? And with an underperforming economy like ours, this might be sunk costs you might not recover. So it is a protectionism approach of the ruling class ideas, and that's why the bill indicated that it's only 20 to 25%. It did not allow for BAS to be an independent authority. And you can see with the behavior of BAS that its independence is compromised. So in terms of interacting with this bill, it gave away a bit in terms of the ministry, the government's thinking pertaining to broadcasting. This can be tied to what has happened with the call and award of licenses. You know, we issued a statement, a very broad statement as MISA, that the licensing presents pluralism, pluralism without diversity. You know, it's like I stand here and say, in this room there's a guy who is mischievous of going after married women, and those women are not comfortable with his behavior. And one guy within the room stands up and says, you're going too far, you're crossing the line. But that doesn't take away the fact that even if that guy is part of the plural but not diverse, that the environment in where the broadcasting licensing is created remains plural but lacking diversity. Whatever situation, what has happened today, what has happened within Zimbabwe in opening up television licensing, marks of government stronghold in the industry, which took so long to be opened up and presented a facade of opening, when in actual fact, it's promoting the ruling class. Nick Mangwana confirmed it. He says, of all the shortlisted, you wanted diversity, yet who of these doesn't have links with the ruling party or the government? Himself, he tweeted. Even if there are exceptions or lack of, the fact will remain that the ruling class is dominating broadcasting industry today. And it undermines, in a very big way, the ability for creating confidence for many people to invest in the industry and create jobs for the journalists and to create competition and high quality productions. It is critical that you have a very competitive broadcasting sector so that you open it up and allow for various spaces to be producing content. That way you develop a responsive society You develop a society that is interacting with itself. The journalists will have the leeway to sell their content to the highest bidder. But if you allow for collusion and other isms, you are setting the broadcasting industry for failure. Now, I think the key questions that journalists in this room need to continue to engage on is that, is the market going to be kind to those that have received licenses under the conditions of the law that are currently present? Will the industry be able to start growing in terms of content generation in broadcasting? You saw in broadcasting it's about content. Kwese, with all its muscle in terms of assets, could not manage to keep on its feet. So if you are going to draft policy as a government, draft policy that enables ease of access of resources for the players in the industry. Why we want a sustainable media industry? The reason why we are analyzing this is we want growth in the industry. But if you go on a blind scale, like we have not learned in the past 40 years, that protectionism does not work, but allowing for competition enables quality products and competitive existence of the industry, then we'll face serious challenges that we might lead to compromising the growth of the industry. So our own submission is that analyze what has happened, help us to scrutinize how the spectrum, which is a public resource, is being distributed and its implications to the development of the broadcasting industry. The issue of undemocratic is my fourth issue. I said I have 10, and I said I want to use my entire hour. Undemocratic regulation of the internet. Now, with IPA, we are running away from omnibus regulation of the three legs that IPA stood off. That's regulation, access, and right to privacy. Now, we are doing the same mistakes with the cyber security and data protection bill. This bill has got three broad issues it is going to regulate: cyber crimes, data protection, electronic transactions in one. The whole world has tried it. South Africa tried it. They went that route and they realized it doesn't work and then unbundled again. It is wrong to take off on a bill that is lumping together broad issues which are contradicting. For example, if you are talking of cyber security, in one arm, you can't talk of data protection because by its nature, cyber security is intrusive. So you can't have a bill that brings intrusion and protection at the same time. So unbundle it so that you have your intrusive eyes standing elsewhere, far away from the data that you want to protect. What we are seeing here is the cyber security and data protection bill, which is before Parliament, creating a huge problem. Now, there are certain problems with this bill that we've outlined over and over again. Firstly, with that, it is lumping together many things. Second, it's creating a mass surveillance society. Mass surveillance, big time. Because if you are going to come up with a new institution called POTRAS, you know, POTRAS is already in existence, Postal and Telecommunication Regulatory Authority. But the bill proposes that on top of POTRAS, you shall have a cyber security center, a data authority center, and all these three shall be one. There's formula to this madness. Why? Because the cyber security center is already in existence. You know it, it's already in existence. It's only not declared, but it's already in existence. And if you take a cyber security center and lump it with POTRAS, what you have done is to say the prying eyes, the darting eyes that are sniffing on cyber security issues are going to be seated together with an institution with massive data that they are collecting from Zimbabweans. POTRAS collects more data than the government in terms of the citizens in this country. Why? Because the Interception of Communications Act allows it to get information from the mobile network operators and internet service providers. And now if you have got that huge amount of data seated in one place and you put a state security agent on top of it, then we are compromised in terms of our safety. And this presents serious challenges in terms of our constitutional rights and the right to privacy as we know it. So once this happens, the day you see this new monstrous creature coming into effect, the day you see Portras, Cyber Security Center, the Data Authority Center being lumped together, the next thing you see a gazette saying, this Portras is now moved from Minister of ICTs into President's office. It's classified. You won't sue it. It will get your information, it will submit it wherever it wants to submit it. And by the end of the day, the Zimbabwean citizen is the biggest loser. The third component is around lack of whistleblower protection. Where in all other jurisdictions, cyber security laws and data protection laws allow for a whistleblowing procedure that enables the protection of those that are providing critical information. This is a key component of journalism, because whistleblowers are also sources. The reason why many people are after our accounts or your email access or your mobile phone, you saw it in the case of Hopewell, that they even tried to compromise his Facebook and Twitter accounts. Why? Because you want to see who blew the cover on you. And when you have such a law coming in to be intrusive in your lives and it doesn't protect the whistleblower, then we have got challenges, because it can be used for anything and it can mean anything. Then it provides for keyloggers. You know what are keyloggers? Keylogger is a software that can be remotely run on your machine or on your phone. I know you are more afraid of your partners, your spouses, or keyloggers, if they are run on your machine or your gadget, whenever you type, they transcribe, they locate the keys that are being punched on passwords. So if I run it in here and then you leave, I will have your access when you are gone. If you want to get into your machine, if you want to get into your phone. It's simple. What I do thereafter is my business. If you are so afraid of your partner getting your password, what more of an entire organized machinery of the government? So the law should be clear, should have mechanisms to protect against interference of our private information. So this whole process of democratic internet governance is a challenge, because it threatens our right to privacy. And the report by the Parliamentary Portfolio Committees on ICTs, on media and defense, the three that went for public consultations, highlighted these things as problematic. Please follow through the report. It's there in Parliament. Just request for it. See what the people of Zimbabwe said about these problematic issues. These are key stories that exert pressure on the center. Then there's another elephant in the room, regional consensus on the need to crack down on social media. Remember, in August 2020, the heads of state and government in SADC met and agreed that we are going to tighten our snooping on online spaces, including social media. These issues are not isolated. When they say snooping online, no one is safe. Most of us are now doing our practice and our enterprise online. When this platform is compromised, your trade is equally compromised. Your sources, the security of your sources are compromised. Everyone becomes vulnerable. And when it is coming from regional bodies, it's even worse, because the whole sense of accountability is lost. Where you are saying a member state of a regional bloc, if one of the member A You go to a broader umbrella group and say, your member is misbehaving, please rein them in. Now these whole groupings are saying we are prepared to misbehave. So how do you raise the appeal mechanisms? There is a serious challenge. What is happening in terms of internet and democratic internet governance in Zimbabwe is spilling at regional levels. The sixth component, one step forward, three back, tied to the resolution in Maputo. When COVID pandemic started, South Africa, the big brother in the region, came up with proposals to regulate fake news. And it was done to flatten the curve. And within no time, Zimbabwe caught up to it, Botswana, Eswatini, Zambia. Zimbabwe being, of course, being the most unreasonable, because it attracted a 14-year category, which means 20 years jail term if you are caught to be spreading fake news. There is a problem with this approach, because when the pandemic ends, the laws will not be removed from our station books. They will remain with us, and they compromise how we do our duties as an industry. So it's a big challenge, if you ask me. How do you define fake news? Today in Zimbabwe, how do you define fake news? Who says it's fake? You remember the first victim of this statutory instrument in Zimbabwe, you remember it? Or you were not born, you weren't born when the COVID pandemic started. There was a guy who said the president is going to extend lockdown. You remember? And he himself came out and said that one will be arrested. Fortunately for him, he extended the lockdown. If he had not extended the lockdown, that guy was going to face 20 years in jail. As a real threat. So these are laws that pretend to regulate social ills, that pretend to regulate serious challenges, but they are used when they are an elephant in the room to stifle expression, to stifle right to privacy and access to information. It creates a much poisonous environment for the practicing of the industry. Now, media sustainability is my 7th point. 3 more to go. You'll be free soon. This is a burden that we are facing, and I want to urge the industry. I know there might be divergent views around this, but I have expressed my opinion and that of MISA at each forum that I get. That the government is an obligation, just like what it does to opposition. If you've got a strong opposition, not a strong, but you've got an opposition that has a presence in parliament, you use taxpayers' funds to sustain it. You use taxpayers' funds to make sure that democracy is enhanced. That's exactly what I'm saying here, that if you want to sustain and enhance our democracy as the country, you as government have got an obligation to ensure that the media does not sink post-COVID pandemic outbreak. And this does not entail giving the media money, that get money, remain afloat. But the media is one of the most taxed industries in the country. So many levies that hemorrhage its resource base. So why don't you review the tax system, specifically for print, the import duty, specifically for broadcasting and other support industries, so that there is minimum cost to keep the media industry afloat post the COVID pandemic? Why don't you issue moratoriums in terms of paying taxes, that after so much time post-COVID, the media is exempt from paying taxes? Why don't you minimize the levies that go to various bodies, such as the BAZ, such as the ZMC, until a certain given time when the media is stable again? These are within the government's control. You just need to review the taxes, the levies, and exempt the industry when it is trying to import anew in terms of equipment to keep its operations afloat. There's no substitute of a robust media in the country. Once you undermine the media, then you've undermined the very existence of the citizens. Because you can't make informed decisions, especially in the age of misinformation and disinformation. You want a professional media that is a point of record. Why? Because they professionally and ethically acquire news, package it, and distribute it. And within this scope, it is key, once again, for the government to review all the pockets of media development funds that are available. Under IPA, it's mandated the ZMC to collect a certain fee, a levy. I think it's about 5% or thereabouts from the industry. But no one knows where that money goes. Under the Broadcasting Services Act, there's the Media Development Fund, which the industry contributes another percentage, which might be around 5% as well. No one knows where the hell the money goes. Under the Postal and Telecommunications Act, there's a 2 to 5%, I think, contribution from the telecoms and internet service providers, which then forms part of the Universal Services Fund. Review the entire courts and see how much is in there as a lump sum, and establish a revolving fund that will then have lower interest rates than the banks, than the commercial interest. The way the media can rebase, and it remains a revolving fund because it will be paid back. We'll wake up without the media industry if nothing serious is done. We'll wake up in the age of state media monopolies again. If we do not take this issue as our own as an industry. My concern is that the industry is not writing or communicating this issue loud enough. This needs to be an agenda item. Otherwise, we emerge with state media as the only voice out of the technicalities of COVID. Where in the previous years the government invested in ravaging the media, the independent media. This time around, if it is left to stand by, it will achieve the objectives of the previous years where it invested so much. In other instances, in the cases of print media, such as the Daily News, which were bombed twice, in other jurisdictions like Voice of the People, which was bombed in Southampton offices once. In other areas where they had to use the law to close the institutions altogether, the case of the Daily News, the case of the Tribune. In other cases where the government used you remember the story of the CIO gate, where they took the paper altogether from Igbo Manders and others. We wake up without the media if we are not careful as the industry, and we allow our issues to sink in the noise of the general engagements of the country. So many issues which are useless are taking headlines. You see the issues of socialized, speculating about snakes, but these are our issues, profound. And we have a rampant corruption in this country than ever seen if the media is not allowed to emerge out of the woods of COVID-19. My plea is that make this an industry issue at every platform. Others can be generous by actually making, providing space. If you provide us space to write about these things on weekly basis or to do interviews, we'll be available. Give us the space. Write about them. Make them perennial so that the government can respond. The eighth one, too shy from completing. The need for a holistic approach on media law reform is key towards creating a stable and safe environment for journalists to perform their industry and craft. The two that are under the government's agenda are cherry-picked by the government itself and presented to us. But the level of discourse in our industry is that this is a media law reform process. It's holistic. No, this is a government-led. They brought two. We need to remind them that there is a whole lot of chaff that is within our statute books that needs to be attended to. These ones are even lethal. The Interception of Communications Act, it allows Econet to present your data to anyone within the establishment who is looking for it. That is to say, if the government requests mobile network, actually the Act says the players shall ensure that they modernize the equipment that allows for interception. So you do not only need to install once. After some time, the statutes require you to review and upgrade so that it's easy to intercept information. So there's no secret in most of you when you're in trouble and you see someone calling with an open line and secured line on voice. They say, "Comrade, I'm in hiding." You're in hiding. You're calling using your mobile network line, and you're hiding from who? It's intercepted. It's easy. Or someone sends a text message using the mobile network or line. They say, "Chief, I'm in hiding, and so please come and pick up." And you're using an open message. You are not hiding from anyone. That can be intercepted easily. The only time you are trying to be hiding is when you are using secure platforms like Signal, like WhatsApp. But as recently, we are realizing that there are efforts to make WhatsApp vulnerable. That's in 2015. Actually, the Chinese managed to make the WhatsApp details of Bobby Wine in Uganda vulnerable, and located his position for the Ugandan government to go on a field day. So let's be aggressive and vigilant in terms of articulating our industry issues. No one will give them prominence, and they only make our job worse if we do not articulate them, because they make it difficult for us to perform our industrial related interventions. Now, the attempt to mutilate the constitution is the second from last. I think this was slowed down, but it's not out of the agenda. I remember the ruling party was, the chief whip was complaining that MPs are not coming to parliament, yet we have got serious business. I think the issue of DCCs slowed down the ruling party, but we need to keep an eye on this issue. Why? Because there are key issues like that the media will not be able to cover the amount of government borrowing. If this goes on, you can't cover how much the government is borrowing. Who is government borrowing? Who is the government borrowing? It's the people of Zimbabwe borrowing, and you can't make it public. So if we do not attend to these, lethal issues of our the technical issues of our industry, then tomorrow you will find it very difficult. Each time you write a story, you have broken the law. So we need to put them on the agenda so that they gain traction, and we keep on pushing back on unnecessary intrusions and irrelevant efforts towards making it difficult for us as a people, as an industry, to do our work, which is provided by the very same constitution. The last one, you are now almost free. The attempt to regulate one's love for his country. Initially, they wanted to call it the patriotism bill. But they faced the problem because that was going to take too long. To come up with a bill, you have to gazette it, go to public hearings, Parliament, it goes through 3 readings, and then it goes to the Senate, then it goes to the President, and then it becomes law. Now, if they take the route of amending the code, Criminal Law Codification Reforms Act, it means that they only need their 2/3 majority to amend it. That's it. It's law. So it's faster, it's easier, you are caught interviewing American ambassador in Sufu. You have shown no patriotism to your country. Myself, if I attend a meeting where I'm sitting, even if I do not talk to the ambassador, he's seated there, I'm seated there, and the picture emerges in the media, it's potential criminal offense. Chances were that we're in the same place and we're going to communicate. Or you are seen meeting a US ambassador, and then coincidentally there's a story that the government is not yet with. Chances are that you got that poison from the ambassador. So it will be a criminal offense. Now these are very much non-progressive laws and non-progressive energy being put into a process that will leave our industry more vulnerable, more exposed. Why, when that thing happens, when you invite the government snooping eyes, your sources will not be left safe. They will be left vulnerable. If they take you in on these allegations, they will not stop there. They will get into your sources, they will get into your private information, and by when you are done, your main currents of the trade, which is confidence from your sources, will be undermined. So let's make these our industry issues. They are not happening out there. They are not just happening. They are going to have huge impact on how we are going to do business as an industry. So we need to link the dots, to connect the dots and ensure that when we are doing our work, we maintain that turf of doing our work with much agility in terms of defending it. Thanks, comrades.
Okay, thank you very much, Tarani.